Welcome back, everybody. So we've got our game here, and it's starting to function pretty well, but before we call it done, we also want to try to make it look kind of nice too. So let's start by getting an animated player character. Right now my player character is pretty boring and not animated at all. He's moving, but he's not animated in any way. The good news is, you've pretty much done all of this before, so this will be just a quick review, and it should help you understand how to apply what you already know to the player character that we're working with now. So there's a couple ways that you can find the sprites that you need to animate this. One, as you've probably already guessed, is you could go to Piskel, and you could paint your own character with their own walk cycle, like I've done here. This is actually a character I created a little while ago for an Endless Runner game that I was making in another program, but it could still work here. This is actually very small. I created this only in 32 by 32 pixels, which would be minuscule even by our little Snap game project. So maybe I'll scale this up to something like, this might still be on the small side. This is just a guess. I'll say like 120 by 120, and I'll tell it to resize the canvas content. Otherwise, it would just make the canvas bigger, and my character would still be very small. But if I resize the canvas content, it will make him bigger as well. Now, I could go back and I could paint a lot more detail in this character using all these extra pixels, but that's not really important right now. I just want to make sure that you remember that when you have a good character built in Piskel and you want to get it into your game, you can resize it very easily if needed, and then you can go down to Export. Keep in mind you can also scale this when you export it. But because I already scaled this to be 120 by 120, I don't really need to worry about that right now, but if you need to make a last-second change, this is another way that you could quickly scale it. So now let's click Download. And I'm downloading this as a GIF because I think that's one of the easiest ways to work with it, but you could also download this as a sprite sheet, and we'll be going over both of these a little bit later on. So now we have our new GIF example from Piskel. But there's other ways that we can get GIFs that we could use for our game if we need to get something quickly. We don't have to make everything from scratch all the time. You could go to Google Images and look for sprites there. Now, whether you just search for something like platformer player sprites, or you look for a specific character like Mega Man or Sonic or Mario, these are all fine options. One thing you should do to make your life a little easier, though, is make sure that whatever you search for, you select Tools, and then go to Color, and select Transparent. Otherwise, you'll have to go and cut out a white background, or just deal with a really ugly-looking sprite in your scene. You may also consider using the term walk cycle, or whatever animation you're specifically looking for. So I could take something like this GIF right here, and simply save it out. And I could take this into Photoshop, and start splitting it up into separate frames that I could use in my game. Now, another way to do this, if you're not finding a GIF of what you want, is you could take something like this, like a whole sprite sheet. Of course, make sure you're getting the full image and not just the thumbnail. And I can save this to work with in Photoshop as well. Now, the GIF is probably the easier way to work, but you may not be able to find what you want as a GIF, so we'll explore both options. After bringing the GIF into Photoshop, we'll notice that we have 4 layers. Though we really only have 3 different sprites. One sprite is just repeated twice to help the GIF play out a smooth animation. So we have right leg forward, crossing, left leg forward, and then that same crossing one again. These two are absolutely identical. So we only need to export 3 of these to get started with our animation in Snap. So with just layer 1 turned on, by clicking the box next to it to turn that eyeball on and not selecting any of the others, I'll just go to File, Save As. Remember, it's important to make this a PNG because Snap doesn't know how to use a Photoshop document, and things like JPEGs don't know how to handle transparency, and we don't want there to be a big white box around Mega Man. So a PNG is very important. And I'll just call this Mega 1. And hit Save and OK. Turn off layer 1, turn on layer 2. File, Save As, PNG, Mega 2, Save, OK. Turn off layer 2, turn on layer 3, File, Save As, Mega 3, PNG, Save, and OK. And here we've got our original GIF, but more usefully, we've got the 3 different frames that we need, with a nice transparent background. So these are ready for Snap. But what if you can't find the GIF that you want? What if all you can find is a sprite sheet like this? Well, that'll still work just fine. I'll just control click this and go to Open with Photoshop. So now we have our sprite sheet. No different layers, just one layer with all the different frames that Mega Man uses in the game. But now we need to cut these down. We need to slice it up into just the ones that we need. So if we're just looking for our walk cycle, first let's find where it is. Alright, pretty easy to identify. These are the same 3 frames that we just got out of our GIF. But if we were to use the method of the sprite sheet, I would take the rectangle select tool. I'll select one of the frames that I need. And then I will simply copy this. And then I'm going to create a new document. I can do this by hitting Command N or going File New. And the only setting I'm going to change here right now is the background contents. I don't want white, I want it transparent. And I'm going to hit OK. And then, on this very small and empty image, I'm just going to go and hit Command V or Edit Paste to paste that frame that I just selected. Now I'm going to go and do a Save As, and you guessed it, PNG, give it a name, and you can do the exact same process like this. Just take your selection, drag it around, or create a new selection if need be for each frame that you need. And the fastest process is Command C to copy, Command N for a new document, make sure it's transparent, OK, Command V to paste, and you've got your second frame. So you can repeat this for any frames that you need out of your sprite sheet. But either way, what you'll end up with is separate sprites as separate images with a transparent background, ready to go into your game. So to start animating this, first things first, make sure that you have your player selected, and then go to the Costumes tab. With the Costumes tab selected, you can easily just select the sprites that you want to use and drag them in. Again, really this should be review because we just did a lot of this at the end of last quarter. Oh, and my wonderful Mac is having one of these bugs here where a thumbnail on the desktop is showing up in front of everything else. So we're going to deal with this little Mega Man picture sitting here for the rest of this tutorial. We'll just have to ignore that. Now, Mega Man here might be a little bit bigger than I want him to be, but that's okay for right now. We could scale this down in a number of ways. So we have our 3 frames. Let's get this animated. First, let's get rid of this little character that, well, just doesn't look like what we want. So let's delete him for now. And then let's go to our scripts. And already Mega Man is working as our new character controller. Now his collision feels a little bit weird because of how I programmed the ground sprite. So his feet aren't exactly lined up right now because the size of our imported sprites are quite a bit different than the size of the ones that we drew by hand. Keep in mind, if you wanted to, some people can work this way and do something really nice. You can paint your own sprites right here using the sprite painting tool, and you can animate it that way. I find it very difficult to work with the paint tools inside of Snap, but it is possible. If you like it and you can handle it, go for it. But now that we have our sprites in here, oversized as they may be, let's make sure we remember how to get them animated. Easiest way to get this started? Well, when I press the right or left arrow, I want that animation to play. So I'm going to duplicate this, and notice I'm not actually clicking duplicate, I'm clicking on this little image of the code that's right below the word duplicate. So that way I duplicate just this block and not all the stuff that's snapped on below it. So when we hit the right arrow, we're still going to move to the right, but parallel to that, we are also going to, in our looks category, use our next costume. And this is the very simplest version of this code. It will allow for some funny things like when we're airborne and holding down the arrow key, Mega Man will look like he's just running in the air, which will feel a little bit silly. If you wanted to put more time in this, you could definitely do this in a way where when you're jumping, your legs aren't flailing around, you're playing a specific jumping animation, and when you land on the ground, you might even have a landing animation. There are ways to improve this, even within the limitations of Snap, but right now, we're just going with the basics. So now you can see I've got my walk animation. And again, it feels a little bit awkward when I'm jumping and holding down the arrow key, but this is just a start. So you need to get your character animated. This is a bare minimum. I highly recommend that you find some ways to improve the animation. Now, as we saw, my Mega Man was way too big for my stage, so An easy way to resize this is simply when we have it in Photoshop, go to Image, and then Image Size. And right now it's at 200 by 200. We can see that that's too big. So we'll go down to something like 80 by 80. And if we go through our export process, I won't make you watch it again, but I'll show you the result in just a second. Okay, so you can see my smaller sprites resized from my larger ones here. If I drag these in, I don't even need to change the code because the code is still there and it's just using the next costume, so it doesn't really matter which costumes are there. It's going to rotate through the costumes, whatever's available. And let's see how it feels now. That is a whole lot better. So we've still got that goofy running while airborne thing, but the size of this is so much better than it was before. And for those of you that want your character to really look a little bit better while jumping, here's the easiest fix I can think of. Instead of just when key right arrow pressed, we use the next costume, we check to see if the character is grounded. So if the character is grounded, it will change the costume. If the character isn't grounded, then it won't. So it's not exactly a specific jump animation, but at least the legs aren't kicking about all over the place in the air, and I think this looks a little bit better. I encourage you to experiment with your animations and see what you can pull off, because there's a lot more possible than just what we're doing here. These are the basics, and should help you get started. So let's get our players moving around, and then give them a little bit of animation to help them come to life. Alright guys, good luck, and have fun.